Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Melissa Nahn, President and CEO of the American Composers Orchestra, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's professional development session, which is self-publishing with Jonathan Page of VColeman Music. We have just been listening to Valerie Coleman's Umoja, which is an absolutely wonderful piece, one of my favorites. This session is part of Earshot, the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers through orchestral readings, collaboratory fellowships, consortium commissions, and professional development. Earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music to ensure a vibrant and inclusive future. Earshot is a program of the American Composers Orchestra, completed in partnership with the American Composers Forum, New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras. Composers for our Earshot readings are selected through an open call with no fee or age limit. We are delighted to welcome many of them here today. All of our Earshot professional development sessions are open to the public, so for the full schedule and list of topics, please visit us at www.americancomposers.org. And to get us started, I am thrilled to welcome our Director of Artist Equity, Garrett McQueen.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks again for attending this webinar titled Pens, Paper, Ink, and the Post Office. I'm very excited to have each of you here today and grateful that you were able to take the time. There are so many things that composers have to traverse when it comes to establishing a successful career, especially today. And figuring out the business of how to get your works published is definitely among those more important things. While collaboration and partnership with companies that do the work of publishing new compositions is the path that many composers take, more and more living composers have found ways to make self-publishing a reality. Of course, the idea of publishing your own works without external support is much easier said than done. Taking on the task of self-publishing can seem extremely complicated, even mystifying. So with the help of composers and our collaborators that have figured out how to manage self-publishing, ACO is proud to offer webinars like these to help demystify that process. I'm very excited to put you on to what today's featured speaker has to offer, but before I introduce him, just a few housekeeping notes. I'm sure that you may have many questions or comments that come to mind over the course of this presentation. So if you wouldn't mind offering those in the chat, or rather in the Q&A, as we go along, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. If you'd like to come on screen to ask your question at the end of today's presentation, feel free to use the hand raise function here on Zoom, and we'll bring as many of you on screen as we can as time allows. As a follow-up to this session, we will be offering materials for you to review, which will be available at a later date, so be sure to check back and stay tuned for those. I'll also be offering a survey in the chat at the end of today's session that will be offered to you, so please, if you don't mind, be sure to click on that link and offer your feedback. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you today's featured speaker. Jonathan Page is co-president and manager of VColeman Music, the publishing company that houses the sheet music, licensing, and rental catalog of composer Valerie Coleman. His former work in both Fortune 500 corporate finance and music production informed his efforts in structuring a business model for the company as it engages hundreds of presenting arts organizations yearly. Based in New York City, Jonathan is also a classically trained percussionist who received a degree in music industry from James Madison University, and over 2 decades he's explored the mediums of sound engineering, created a documentary on the life of Othello Wilson, and continues his work in mentoring emerging composers. Let's welcome Jonathan Page. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jonathan.
Hello, thank you, Garrett. I want to thank you. I want to thank Melissa and the entire ACO organization for having me here today to participate in this series. I understand this is a vast audience I'll be speaking to today, from emerging composers who will be the brighter stars tomorrow to current day composers who are established composers who may want to know a little bit more about self-publishing, and even professionals in this industry. So hopefully I can present something that everyone can benefit from. As Garrett mentioned, yes, I am Jonathan Page, the co-president, day-to-day operations manager for VColeman Music, a company founded by flutist and composer and my wife, Valerie Coleman. All works, currently 40 active titles are within our catalog, were written by Valerie. We're not revolutionaries here. Self-publishing has been around for many years, even before the Baroque era. Even some of the alum of this Earshot initiative currently self-publish in some capacity. And as I get my screen share up, one thing I do want to mention, I'm often on the road with Valerie as she goes to concerts, and I get a chance to talk with different composers who do self-publish their own music. And it's very exciting to share our stories with one another, to see what we do, see how we do things, some of the frustrations we may have, and some of the successes we have. And it's very refreshing to share those stories with them. So I'm going to get started today. Basically, this is a subject in self-publishing. It's a course, actually, that I'm going to try to cover in less than 1 hour through my experience. So today, we're going to cover, among the topics, why would a composer consider self-publishing, our story, how we got started into this, the different revenue streams you should be looking out for, licensing, rentals, and sheet music, which are part of my day-to-day activities. So to get started, I think it's important to know why a composer, especially emerging composers, would want to go with a publisher, go with an established publisher. The first thing is time. That composer may not have the time at that moment. They may be a touring musician. They may be somebody who's in academia. They may be someone who just want to devote their time to their craft, to creating music. The other reason could be they need a means of distribution. They could need a means of promotion to get their music out there. And then for some composers, they need that validation, just so that they know that they are an esteemed composer and they can show others that they are an esteemed composer. On the other side of the coin, you have the option to self-publish. And three of the big reasons why you would consider it is 100%. I think that speaks for itself. Retaining 100% of your revenue, retaining interest in your intellectual property, and One thing I didn't mention with a major publishing house or with any publishing house is that the revenue that you would have to give up in these cases, which can be anywhere up to 90% for the sales, licensing, and rentals that come through for revenue. So that's a bitter pill for a lot of composers to swallow. The second two reasons are very personal to Valerie: agency, meaning having complete control over her compositions and how they're used, and also building generational wealth. Both Valerie and I, we do have a 9-year-old daughter, and we're very happy to see that she watches us as we, or I guess I would sit at a printer, print out music and bind the music, or just sit there and correspond with other organizations. And hopefully one day she'll see this, and maybe the seed will be planted for her to continue this operation. So Valerie Coleman, I think it's important to understand how she got started. As everyone may know, but Valerie Coleman's career started in earnest around 1997 when she created the woodwind quintet Imani Winds, which started a 20-year career as a touring musician with the group. During that time, the group was always looking for new material to write, and they happened to have two composers within the group, Valerie being one and Jeff Scott, the horn player, being the other. Oftentimes, Valerie would tell me about the early days of her self-publishing, even though she may not have thought of that way. She would write the music and she would print out music on her old printer, which she labeled Old Bessie. She gave it a name. She gave her printer a name. It was an old, I don't think it was a LaserJet. I think it was an inkjet printer that she printed out her music. And what she would do, she would print it out and she would go to concerts with Imani Winds. And after the concert, she would have them on the merchandise table for people to buy. So in 2001, she wrote a piece, Umoja, which you heard at the beginning of this webinar, and she had it published by an established publisher at that time, because for the reasons I mentioned before, she did not have the time. She was on the road a lot, and she wanted to devote her time to playing her flute and devote time to touring with her group at the time. So she went with an established publisher at the time, International Opus, who was pretty big in publishing a lot of woodwind quintet literature at that time. Basically, over the next decade, she continued to write works, and she continued to print out these works for the tables that will be sitting there after Imani Winds concerts. And she did get other works published during that time. Fast forward to 2014, she launched the website VColemanmusic.com, which contained an e-commerce feature for her to start selling music. By that time, a lot of musicians were comfortable in selling their music online, and they were willing to risk the piracy that could come of such a thing. And it became a very efficient way of distributing your music at the time. You no longer had to sit at a printer. You no longer had to mail out your music upon receiving an order. Basically, you set it up on your website, and someone will purchase it, and the customer will download it. Somewhere around 2017, we started, or even before that, around 2014, Valerie and I were starting to have discussions about taking back some of the compositions that were within International Opus at the time. And part of that's because she wanted, the idea of self-publishing was starting to creep in her mind. She wanted to retain ownership of a lot of her works. So in 2017, we actually started the talks with the publisher, and we were able to get some of those works back within VColeman Music's catalog. The next big break for Valerie, actually in 2018, she retired from the group, and she decided to take an academia position in Florida. So us as a family picked up. I left my job in corporate America, and we all went to South Florida, and I was ready to start my first retirement career. And no sooner had I stepped my foot on the beach, Valerie had asked if I wanted to start fielding some emails from her for her, emails that would come in from time to time, and she didn't have the time to devote to answering a lot of those emails. Some of them pertain to the music that was being sold, some of it pertained to her artist career. So fast forward to 2019, Valerie wrote her first orchestral piece, Umoja, the orchestral version of the piece you heard at the top of the webinar. It was commissioned and premiered by the Philadelphia Orchestra, and Valerie received a tremendous amount of publicity for that commission and for that premiere. Just to give you some numbers, VColeman Music, from 2014 to 2019, probably on average, you would sell anywhere between 100, 200 units. Right after the Philadelphia Orchestra commission and premiere in 2020, her sheet music sales on the website alone went up to over 500. So it was over 150% increase in sales for that publicity appearance. So by this time, we had decided to step into this world of self-publishing. And to tell you honestly, I was just getting out of corporate America, and I had studied music industry a few years ago, and it was something I needed to get my head around again, because I had been out of that sector for a very long time. So the first things that we decided to do was to research and decide on a legal business structure and a model for our company. We know that the model was just going to be run by both of us. And then we went to research Google for the best business type, sole proprietorship, LLC. And in conjunction with researching, we also consulted a music attorney and tax accountant at the time, because whatever company structure you're going to use, there's going to be tax ramifications down the road, and it's important to know that. So once you have your company set up, there are certain things you want to decide. A publishing house has these main components that I have listed at the bottom. You need, after you create your composition, you're going to need a copyist and an engraver and an editor to get it ready for the printer or the printing service that's going to produce your music. You have to decide if you want to print internally or if you want to outsource and print externally. You want to decide if you want to be that sales and shipping manager who want to get the shipment or get the printout, they have to ship it to the customer. You have to decide if you want to be the licensing and rental agent to field all the inquiries that may come in for a particular work. And lastly, you want to see if you want to be the administrator. The administrator, probably one of the most important parts of this operation, is the one that fields the emails, someone that may contact the performing rights agencies, which I'll talk about later, file your music, file the copyrights, someone who's there to like log all of the stuff that that a lot of people may not want to do, but it's really not that big of a deal once you get into it. And lastly, if you're starting a business, you want to identify your revenue streams. So right off the bat, and what VColeman Music has been dealing with over the last couple of years are these different types of revenue streams: licensing, rentals, sheet music, performing rights organizations, and mechanical royalties. Mechanical royalties could go under licensing, but I think it's important to separate it because it's definitely something you should be on top of. So I'm going to spend time talking about each of these as I go through the presentation. Just to show you, give you an idea of the revenue that is brought in, 2022, I was able to calculate that rentals, 49% of the revenue that came from rentals. Almost half of the revenue came in from a rental catalog of 3 pieces that we have there currently. In addition to Umoja, Valerie was able to write a couple of other pieces that were in response to the pandemic, one being 7 O'Clock Shout, which was commissioned and premiered by Philadelphia Orchestra, and the Fanfare for Uncommon Times, commissioned by the Orchestra of St. Luke. And during that time, there was a need for new repertoire, and these fit the bill for a lot of presenting organizations. Sheet music sales, 29%. That is between not only VColemanmusic.com, but also with the different retailers that I engaged with. Right now, we are engaged with close to 15 different retailers, and it's growing every week, it seems. Licensing is another component that makes up some of the revenue. And easily in 2020 and 2021, licensing was probably a lot higher than that. But since a lot of organizations have gotten back on stage, licensing is down just a little. And mechanical, I have listed, but in truth be told, it's probably less than 1%, but I think it's something that everyone should be aware of. These percentages also correlate to the amount of time that I spent on a day-to-day or weekly basis for each. Yes, I do spend most of my time on rentals, and sheet music comes in number 2, sometimes a very close number 2, depending on how many orders come through. So back to the story. In 2019, the Philadelphia Orchestra premiere of Umoja happened. And when we entered the pandemic era a few months later, it brought forth some uncertain times for everyone. All of the stages went black, and there were 2 months there where we did not know what the next step was going to be in this industry. Just for reference, I think during that time, we were selling close to 40 units of sheet music on VColemanmusic.com up until March 2020. And for May and June alone, or maybe for April and May alone, we only sold a total of 7 units of sheet music. So it was scary times for everyone in this world, and especially the music world, where we didn't know what the next step was going to be. So fast forward to June or July of 2020, I received an email from a major symphony orchestra who asked the question, I want to license, I need a synchronization license for Umoja Woodwind Quintet. Can you please send me a license and please give me a fee and a quote? And it was the first time that I received such an email. So I was pondering to myself, I'm like, I knew what a synchronization license was, but I just did not know anything about rates and what I should charge and the process. And that's when I contacted a music attorney, an entertainment attorney, to walk me through some of the ins and outs of the business of licensing, of synchronization licenses, and all the licenses that I have listed here. But first it was synchronization. I'm like, look, I have this request to come in, and I need to know how much to charge. What kind of things should I ask for in these requests? And it's so funny because right after I posed that question to him, I think I received another synchronization license request. And I kind of thought that this was going somewhere, so I thought I should get a hold of the process as soon as possible. Basically, the lawyer, he was very good to me, and his name was Mark Ostro, one of the top entertainment lawyers in the country. And those early days were with him was very beneficial to the company. So basically, I got the request, and I had a spreadsheet that I put all of these parameters that the presenting organization needed to fill out. And based on what they gave me back, I was able to form a rate of what I think we should charge for the license. And keep in mind, when we're talking rates, and I think that's going to be a popular topic today, at that time, we were all in the pandemic, and you want to be fair. And fair not only to the organizations who may be struggling, but also fair to the artist, to the composers. So you're in between both worlds, trying to make sure that everyone benefits. And basically, once you come up with your rate chart, you present that rate to the presenting organization. And if we agree, you'll send them an agreement, which was drafted by the attorney for me. And it's an agreement that I was able to use for a lot of sync licenses after that. Once they agree on the terms of the agreement, I'll send an invoice to them to pay. And that was the end of it. For 2020, I guess you can say it was that request times over 100 requests that came in throughout the year. And it was a wild time for sure. Other licenses you should look at is Grand, or that's something that came our way a couple of months ago. There's mechanical. Mechanical licensing is something that you should invest in. While it may represent a small portion of your revenue, it's something that's very important. There's something called the Mechanical Licensing Collective that was started 2 years ago. And it's for artists, composers, publishers to sign up to so they can collect their royalties from the streaming and physical, the digital streaming and sales of your music. And of course, for the physical CD sales, there are agencies like the Harry Fox Agency, which VColeman Music uses to honor. We use the Harry Fox Agency to issue licenses on our behalf for mechanical licensing. In addition, there's also the radio transcription license. If your music is being played on the radio, you as a composer have the right to issue a license and charge a fee for that. And lastly, print license, where if somebody wants to use an excerpt of your music in a method book, there's a license for that and there's a fee to be charged for that. So 2020 went by, and as we got into the spring of 2021, orchestras are starting to come back on stage. Valerie had 3 pieces at that time in her rental catalog, and there was a high demand for them. So just as that first email I received in July 2020, I received a similar email somewhere in early 2021, or maybe at the end of 2020, saying, hey, we're interested in renting your Mojo or 7 O'Clock Shout. So once again, I went to my spreadsheet and I went to my lawyer and said, hey, I have a rental request. What should I be asking for? And he was once again able to walk me through the process. I had the spreadsheet with all the details that were needed. And once the presenting organization sent that back to me, I was able to give them a rate. And once we signed off on the agreement, I was able to invoice them. And that's halfway through the process of that. What happens is that a lot of these organizations may ask for music a year in advance. Sometimes they may ask for it a month in advance. And I knew very quickly that I was going to run into a problem. I kept everything in Excel, which was great, but there's an important item on that sheet that I asked for, and that is when the date required for your material, meaning the date that the orchestra will need, or the orchestral librarian would need the music from the publisher to distribute to the musicians. And I knew that if I'm going to get a lot of rental requests, there's no way I'm going to be able to keep up with keeping track of who needs the music and when. So I was able to research online and find just a simple online form for the presenters to fill out. One of the things I wanted to do was to make it clear on our website where to go to rent the music, posted the score. So if the librarians wanted to see the instrumentation for budget reasons, I made that apparent for them. Also for conductors, if they want to see the music, I do have it posted online, the score that is posted online for viewing only. So once we send the music out, we box it, I send the box music out, and then I receive it back from each orchestra, and it's a revolving door of music going in and going out weekly. The last thing with rentals, and I put ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, these are the performing rights agencies, and for our purposes, ASCAP and BMI are probably the main players right now. And the reason that I'm not mentioning CSAC as much is because that is by invitation. But ASCAP is what Valerie belongs to. And it is the presenting organization's obligation to report any concerts to ASCAP on an annual basis. But it also doesn't hurt for the composer or the publisher to let ASCAP know that, hey, this so-and-so played this piece on this date. And I'm just talking mainly orchestral music at this point, because Valerie's pieces are being played, her chamber works are being played in a lot of places, and there's no way to keep track of that unless these public performance venues submit this information. So basically, it's important to sign up to these organizations that will pay you, and these organizations do want to pay you. They don't want to hold on to your money. It benefits the composer to be a part of that whole process and let the organizations know that they are there. The other component that we dealt with is sheet music. Currently, more than half of the works that we have on VColeman Music are digitally distributed. We do have some printed copies of music that we send out exclusively, but right now we are moving towards a new website. We're moving towards a new e-commerce site that will give us the flexibility to sell pieces of music in both forms. And the interesting thing about sheet music, in my experience, is that this was probably my first duty within VColeman Music, is when we took back the pieces from International Opus, I had to figure out how to print this music. And we were in Florida at the time, and a lot of our equipment was left back in New York. So we had to go out and get a good printer, a prosumer printer, to be able to produce this material. And I had to, I asked Valerie, what was the best format? What's the best material to use? And a lot of this information is online as well. So I was able to research that and find out, all of a sudden, I'm in the world of finding out paper sizes, paper weight, paper color, the equipment that's needed for a printer, the toner, staples, rigid mail envelopes, boxes, everything you can think of that goes with distribution. And it sounds like a lot, but it was actually very exciting to be a part of that process, to see the music sales come in and see music being distributed. So I encourage you, after today's talk, there are some resources that you can go to that will help guide you through the process if you are thinking about self-publishing. One of them is, the first book listed is All You Need to Know About the Music Business by Donald Passman. Ironically, this was my first textbook in college, the first edition, actually, and now we're in the 10th edition. And it's important to know, if you are researching things online, that you should date the material, make sure that the information you're getting aligns with today's music industry. If you're reading an article from 2010, it's not going to necessarily help you with a lot of the things today, because laws do change over time. These other organizations listed, American Independent Music Publishers, it's an organization that you can belong to, and they have forums on there that do talk about topics that I brought up today. The National Music Publishers Association is another one. And also, surprisingly, the Major Orchestra Librarian Association, which is an association of all the music librarians, and you're able to get a sense of what the music librarians are looking for around the country. You'll see, and they have a forum on there, and they have a lot of informative articles that help not only librarians, but also composers and publishers to find out the standard of today's music that needs to be delivered. So that was a quick run through of what I do at VColeman Music, and I wanted to leave open a lot of time for questions. I know this was a topic that I could spend an hour on each slide, but I did want to leave open that window for questions so I can make sure this conversation goes where it needs to go. So I'll bring Garrett right back on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So there is one question from an anonymous attendee. The question is, art music composers seem to only publish under their full legal name. If I self-publish music, can I use an artistic pseudonym and still be considered just as legitimate or regarded highly as a composer in the field?
Absolutely. A lot of the music we have are copyrighted under VColeman Music. Of course, Valerie uses her name. But yes, you can use an anonymous name even if you want to copyright, if that's what the question was, from what I understood. But as you see, when you do the copyright, you do have that option to put a pseudonym if you do want to go under that name. and you can list it on your music as well as such.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We have another question from Manisha. Manisha asks, can you help explain the rental process? What is being rented and how is it being used exactly?
Okay. So I did breeze through that section. So the rental process is for orchestral music and some band works. Some band works are sold, some of them are rented. So basically, the orchestras will come to a publisher if they want to program a piece of music, and they will say, hey, we want to program this music for our concert series next summer. Basically, what that does, it gives the composer and the publisher the option to rent a piece of music based on the number of plays, usually, also based on the duration of the piece, and also based on the orchestra or the instrumentation of the piece. Basically, you go through the process as I explained. You get those major components from them of what you need to form the rate. Everything from the shipping address to the concert date, how many plays or how many times they're going to program the work, and also if it's an educational production, you want to offer a discount for those type of things. So basically, once you rent that piece of music, you'll send it to that presenting organization. They'll keep it for whatever time you want to set. Our standard time here at VColeman Music is 12 weeks. And during that time, they'll rehearse and they'll play the music. And within 10 days after performing the music, they will return the music back to the publisher. And the cycle goes on. Sometimes when the music comes back, sometimes I don't have music here to send out. Right now, we probably have at least 10 to 15 sets of Umoja. And I think right now there's like 2 of them here on premises. Sometimes I'll get stuck with an orchestra needing a set. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't have a set here. What am I going to do? Am I going to print or have printed another set? Or am I going to, the other options, I can contact one of these organizations that has the music, and I know that they're sending it back, and I'll have that have them send it to the orchestra that needs it at that time. So basically, that is a process once you start writing orchestral music. I explained the way of sending physical product out, but there's also a way that you can also distribute it digitally. A lot of these orchestras, they may go to iPads one day, and it'll make it a lot easier and efficient if they would adopt that, but I don't see that coming anytime soon. So I hope I was able to explain that a little bit more in depth.
And this next question actually dovetails with that perfectly. The question from Nathan is, what are your thoughts on digital pricing versus physical pricing? Should digital prices be lower than physical?
My standpoint is that they should be the same. You're getting the same music. You're not getting the paper product, but you are printing it on paper. So that's my standpoint, and people do have different viewpoints on that. I've seen it both ways across the industry. I've seen it where they do offer less for digital. I've seen it where it's the same for digital and physical, but it's totally up to the publisher which way they want to go on that. But that is a very good question, because I did ponder with that whole thing. If you go to different composers out there, they do list their prices. The composers that self-publish, you'll see their prices listed, and you can kind of compare to see where it stands as far as not only their pricing, but also how do they price digital versus physical.
Jonathan asks, can you talk about setting up the website, how you decide what to say about each piece, and any problems you ran into while setting up the website?
Great. So I'll speak on Valerie's behalf on this. Right now, we're running the website that she created a few years ago, and we're actually in the process of getting a new website. But what happens is when new pieces are released, yes, I have to go in and update the website And usually if I have to put in anything for a piece, if it's a chamber work, it's important to put a little blurb about each piece. It could be from your program notes. It can be definitely the duration. If you have a recording, even if it's a MIDI recording, it'll be helpful. So basically a lot of the write-up that goes in with each piece is from the program notes that are on there. If you have any type of media that you can throw up there is great, because the more plays and the more that people hear your work in its true form, the better for you.
I'm gonna put these next two questions together because they seem a little complementary. This comes from Rebecca and an anonymous attendee. How do you decide which works to rent versus sell as sheet music? And does the price of rental fees vary from piece to piece, or is there a rate that's industry standard for rentals?
Great question. It's a loaded question. Well, first of all, deciding which pieces to rent is pretty easy. If it's an orchestral piece, it's going to be rented, just from our standpoint. If it's a band piece, we're going to enter the world of band in the coming months. And we've been talking about this, about how we're going to distribute it. One frame of mind, we're going to maybe sell it, maybe we'll rent it. So we're going back and forth with that. So it's really up to the publisher how they want to do it. But for orchestral work, I do recommend that you do rent it, because I've received close to, it's hard to keep track, but actually I have a spreadsheet to do that now. It's like over 300 rental requests over the last 16 months. And so you're going to have, so if you do the math, 3 pieces, 250 rental requests. So it's probably, I don't know, 80 times the piece is going to be played. And think about how many sets that is. Do you want to reproduce sets every time somebody wants to run a piece of music, or play a piece of music? So that's why rental is beneficial. Now, rates, that's something where you have to do some research on. There are composers who do rent their own music. The rates do vary, and some composers do list their rates. And you have to use your best judgment, because there is no standard. I think some of the major publishing houses do charge more because they have more overhead to account for. But you should definitely form your own rent chart. See what is the music worth to you? What is it worth to others? And don't shortchange yourself. You'll know if you're charging too high, because you'll get a lot of pushback. And the one thing you want to do is work with these organizations. These organizations are not going to have the same budgets. And that's something you do have to keep in mind. And it's actually a criteria that I do put on the rental form. And I do, like, if I didn't mention that before, do go to our website to look at the rental request form that we have. And those are the criteria that I use to come up with a rate. So you just have to use your best judgment in doing that, because you really want to be fair to the composer. You want to be fair to the organization that's performing the music.
Great, thank you. Rachel asks, you mentioned 15 retailers you work with. Would you elaborate?
Okay, the retail process. So part of selling sheet music is not only can you sell it on your website, but there's some established sheet music vendors out there. Sheet Music Plus, Theodore Front, come to mind, Carol Nussbaum, retailers that will sell within their online store, retailers that will sell at conventions. So the relationship that you want to set up with a retailer is that you want to give them copies of the music, but you want to give it to them as a discount, because they're trying to run a business themselves. The discount you give them could be anywhere between, I don't know, 20 to 40%. That's something for you to work out with each retailer. But it's something that, and what I mentioned before, I think it was 30% of our revenue came from sheet music in 2022. Half of that was from retailers. The other half was from online sales. So you could tell it's an important part of your revenue. And as your list of retailers grow, your list of distribution channels grow as well. And I've seen that firsthand. Each retailer I get sales like within a week of signing on to them. So it's definitely something you want to consider. We do offer all of Valerie's music in printed form. We just don't have it all in printed form on her website, but it is available by demand. And that's how we distribute our music to retailers. We only sell our physical printed copy to retailers at this point.
Great, thank you. Dylan asks, what are the questions you would ask a lawyer who you're interviewing to see if they would be a good representation for you?
Wow, that is a great question. Well, first of all, if you go online, I mean, you can find out everything you need to know about most of these lawyers and attorneys. I think one thing you have to realize very early in the relationship with any lawyer that you want to retain is that they will sit and talk with you for free for a half hour just to find out more about you, find out what you're looking to do with your career, and just to see how they can help you. And you can get a sense from there if they're able to work on your behalf or represent you the way that you want them to represent you. Some of the questions were very poignant when I was talking to an attorney because we had specific situations we were trying to deal with. So it's basically as an as needed basis when I will get on an email and contact a lawyer and ask for guidance. Of course, the important question is rates. What kind of rates do you charge? And even with that question and dealing with that, you have to realize that is an investment in itself, where you may have to pay a little money to retain a lawyer for a short period of time. The benefits of it will pay off going down the road. I'm not sure if I fully answered that, but yes, it's basically we've been doing it as needed.
Deidre asks, how much importance do you place on promoting the catalog to presenters, conductors, and performers? Is Valerie a big enough name that she doesn't need promotion? How would an emerging composer go about promoting their catalog?
Wow. So basically, the second part of that, yes. Valerie had made a name for herself for many years. She had been on the road with Imani Wins. Globally, she had traveled, so her name was out there. By the time that commission came from Philadelphia Orchestra, that even further magnified her name. So to tell you honestly, the requests have been coming to me. I have not been able to, or actually haven't had a need to really push her works out there other than maybe posting something every now and then. That's something that we're going to get more into doing, of course. But right now it's been where her name has been big enough and the demand has been there that I really haven't had to do a lot of promoting. Now, second part of that question is probably more of a question for Valerie, but there are conventions, there are advocacy groups. This Earshot initiative was one that will work on your behalf as well. There are ways, and I guess the question was, how can you promote your music out there? Well, in this day and age, of course, the internet has made that much easier than a few years ago. You're able to just post recordings. Like I said, it's easy. If you can just post a MIDI recording of your work, that would be beneficial. Try to align yourself with the music community of wherever you are, with the local orchestra. You know, one good way of aligning yourself is with the youth orchestra, or making a name for yourself is with the youth orchestra of that community. These are your future musicians. These are your future educators. And it's good to get in front of them to start making a name for yourself. And just approach them as, hey, do you mind if you read this work of mine? I think a lot of them out there are open to doing that. So that may be one avenue you can consider. I think Valerie would have a better answer for this because she's more in tune with that, with the different trades or different conventions out there and advocacy groups. But there are ways out there. And when after this webinar, I think I was talking to you, Garrett, that I am going to post a slideshow that I presented, and maybe I can add a couple of those of items of places where these emerging composers can go to promote their music early on. So I can definitely do that.
Great, thanks. And actually, a follow-up to that question was regarding rentals. Would you ever consider moving exclusively to PDFs?
Oh, absolutely. Who wouldn't? It's the most efficient way of distributing music. Um, there are different ways of distributing it now without the risk. Music reader apps, music, which you can, there actually is a rental feature where you can set it up where of course, you have to convince each musician of the orchestra to accept reading their music off on an iPad, which is easier for the younger generation. But yeah, definitely. I actually ask a lot of librarians from time to time. I ask them and say, "Hey, have you guys explored the idea of using iPads in the future?" And the consensus actually is that a lot of musicians still prefer, a lot of orchestral musicians still prefer paper over over digital, and a lot of that has to do with age. A lot of the orchestral musicians, or some of them, are older members who may not be able to see the music as clearly. But yes, it'll make things a lot more efficient, and especially for international rentals where you don't have to worry about the shipping. A lot of these major publishing houses do have satellite offices in London and Paris and the Asia office. But for a self-publisher, I don't have a Beijing office. I don't have a London office. So having that capability of distributing music digitally would be grand. And hopefully down the road, the industry will move in that direction a lot more. But you definitely should set yourself up for printed music, because that's never going to go away. I mean, that's the tried and true method of reading music. And it's nothing like a piece of printed music and just having that in front of you and reading it. It's nothing's going to ever replace that.
We have a question here from Laura. Hello, Laura. She asks, could you talk a bit more about how you make decisions on working with distributors in terms of weighing ease of purchasing with not getting as much revenue and having less control?
Okay, if I understand correctly, you're asking how do I, can you ask that question again? I'm sorry. I'm in New York City and stuff happens.
Oh, sure, no problems. Yeah, again, the question reads here, could you talk a bit more about how you make decisions on working with distributors? And I think the considerations that she's asking are about ease of purchase, having more or less control, and how that impacts revenue.
Okay, so there's really not a question of control. The relationships I've had with distributors are, I've actually contacted them, I've seeked them out, and I've just sent an email say, hey, we are the publishers of most of Valerie's music now. Would you like to enter it? If you do want to sell the music, please contact me. Usually I'll get a response and we'll work out a percentage. You do have to offer some sort of discount to them. I quickly found out, yes, that's part of your cost of goods sold is the discounts that you do offer, but your distribution channels that you gain from that it's grand. And you have to realize that, you're going to see ASCAP returns on the back end of a lot of these sales. So as far as giving up control, you're really not giving up control of your compositions per se. You're strictly into a transactional situation with these vendors. So basically, yes, my process has been to seek out the major players, say, hey, we have the music, Valerie's music. Are you interested in selling it? If so, please contact me. There's no agreement to enter into. It's just when they send me an invoice, I just know to give them a discount for their music that we're going to send them.
Great.
I'm not sure if I answered. Yep.
Rebecca asks here, does your website interface with Zenfonia, or do you interface with Zenfonia? And if so, does that interfere significantly with your agency and with your profits?
We do not interface with Zenfonia. I have not heard of that being an issue. But yeah, that's something that hasn't been a problem with us at all, because we don't interface with them.
Great. One of the anonymous attendees asks here, are orchestras requiring a standard size of pages and font size for the music?
Yes, there is an industry standard. One of the references I gave you on that last page, MOLA, I believe, but it's the librarian's form, the music librarian's form. All of that is listed. For orchestral music, parts have to be 9 by 12. There's a certain paper weight that you have to give it. There's the color has to be like off-white. They have it specifically listed there. Also, there's some orchestras that require even bigger paper sizes. The Minnesota Orchestra, they require 12 by 18 size paper for their parts. And so, yes, there are standards out there, and definitely go to that website. They do list it there as what librarians and these orchestras do require for their performances.
Great, thank you. A question here from Alexis. My biggest concern about working with distributors is losing the direct relationship with the people wanting to perform my music. Are there ways in which you've navigated this issue so that relationships are still possible, especially to receive things like programs for pro performance notifications?
That really hasn't. That's a great question. Well, when somebody purchases music, especially if you have a website set up, you want to have a feature set up, maybe as a mailing list set up, so you can start forming these relationships. But yes, I do see what you're saying. When somebody buys a piece of music from a vendor, you don't know who bought that music. They're out there playing your music, and you want to see who is purchasing these things. But it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, it's something that if they are performing your music, that really hasn't been an issue. But to tell you honestly, there are a lot of orders that do come through these retailers, and it's not a bad problem to have if people are out there performing your music. And eventually you'll have relationships with them. But if you have your website set up, if you have how to contact you, you can even set up your mailing list. Or a mailing list that they can sign up to. Then you can send them periodic updates from time to time. So there is a way to stay engaged with your audience and with your customers out there.
One question is from an anonymous attendee. How do you handle revisions that arise, especially when the piece is young? Do you keep a version system? Do you update printed packages to accommodate revisions?
Yeah, so basically, sometimes after a premiere, the composer may want to go back to that piece, and she may have heard some things in the piece that just didn't work. And so she's given the liberty, and usually it's, the commissioners know this, that she has the liberty, or the composer has the liberty to go in and make post-premiere revisions. So basically, before it's even on the market, these revisions are made. When you enter into a lot of these commission agreements, there's going to be at least a year in some cases where the orchestra, the commissioning orchestra, is going to have exclusivity to perform that work just for that year. Then after the year lapses, then it can go to the market. So by that time, the composer should have had time to go in and make whatever revisions are necessary before it hits the market. I think there's been like only one piece where we had rented it, but then Valerie wanted to go back and make some revisions. So we just simply took it off the rental market. It wasn't one that was sold, so it was something that we were controlling, one that we were renting. So it was easy to take it off the market at that time.
Great. I think we have time for just one more question. Jimmy asks, where can we find the names of retailers and the conventions that you mentioned?
That's great. I hate referencing Google. It's such a lazy way of answering the question. But the retailers, yes, I mean, they stand out. Sheet Music Plus, I mentioned Carol Nussbaum, Theodore Front. Probably there's a few others out there that's not in my mind right now. Basically just doing a Google search to find some of these retailers. Some of the conventions that are out there, once again, I'm going to post something on that spreadsheet that will give you a reference for that. or on that slide that I gave you that will reference that. But there are conventions all over the country for each instrument. There's conventions for orchestral conventions. There are different organizations that have these conventions where it's great to show up, introduce yourself, and make sure people know who you are. And this Earshot Initiative is a great program for that, because you will get in front of these presenters from time to time.
Thank you so much. Well, before I invite Melissa back to our virtual stage here, I'll ask one final question. Can people reach out to you for more questions or more advice, guidance? And if so, how can they do that?
Absolutely. The company is simply VColemanmusic.com. My email is simply info@VColemanmusic.com. I'm here as a resource if you need to reach me. I can get quite busy, but I do see your emails come in. So just be patient with me and I'll try to answer the best way I can.
Great.
Yeah, info@VColemanmusic.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today and fielding all of these questions and for your presentation. And please send Valerie our best. We all love her music very much. So I'll invite Melissa back to the stage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you for that incredible panel and slate of questions. We are excited also to see in there, how can composers who don't have access to a publisher or don't have the kind of platform promote themselves? And one of the reasons why this question is so exciting to us is that we have recently been awarded a Sphinx Venture Fund to create a publishing arm out of Earshot. So this is a publishing arm that will address the many questions we've gotten from composers over the course of many years about how we can help create relationships for them and with orchestras over a longer term. And it's also a publishing model that allows you to keep your copyright, which is kind of a really lovely thing. So more information on that coming up. I will also say we are supported and are very grateful to be supported by the Stephen R. Gerber Trust. If you're interested, the Gerber Trust is working on a new website called gerbermusic.com. It's an online platform for selling your own music if you don't have a publisher. It's currently in beta, but in the coming months, there will be more information about how you can get involved there. So there are just a couple of little things that you can look towards in all of that. So a little bit of housekeeping for us. We also want to welcome your feedback on today's session. So please go ahead and use the link in the chat to complete a short survey if you would like to give us some detail on what you got out of today. We would also love to welcome you back on January 25th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time for our score and part preparation webinar. This is with ACO's very own orchestral librarian and himself an Earshot alum, Manly Romero and Philip Rothman. So many of the questions you asked about paper, printing, guidelines, MOLA, all of that will be addressed in that session. I'd also like to offer another huge thanks to our Earshot partners, the American Composers Forum, New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras. We couldn't do it without you. We are also very grateful to the many individuals and organizations who have made Earshot possible through their support, and to ACO's artists, staff, and board for making this program a reality. For more information on Earshot, including how you can apply as a composer or connect with us to bring the program to your orchestra, as well as a full list of our supporters, please visit us at americancomposers.org and click the link for composer advancement. So for today, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.